Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin visited Pyongyang this week to attend a meeting on border security. On Monday, Liu laid a wreath in front of statues of DPRK founder Kim Il-sung and late leader Kim Jong Il as a sign of respect. The visit comes after a two-day closed-door meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, between former U.S. diplomats and senior DPRK officials, including Vice Foreign Minister Han Song-ryol. Washington and its allies are urging Beijing to agree to tougher United Nations Security Council economic sanctions against the DPRK after it conducted a fifth nuclear test in September. This month, the DPRK launched an intermediate-range ballistic missile that failed immediately during liftoff. China called for restraint.
As for the DPRK using directed missile technology for its launch, the UN Security Council resolution has clear rules. We hope that under the current circumstances, all sides concerned will show restraint and not to do anything to incite each other or cause an increase in regional tensions.
Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Zhao Tong. He's an associate in the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Also with us is Eunjung Lim. She's a lecturer on Korean Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And we're joined by Becker. He's the Executive Director of the Answer Coalition and an analyst and journalist on U.S. DPRK relations. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Zhao Tong, let me start with you. China has sent one of its top officials to Pyongyang for talks on border security. But what is the Chinese position on the DPRK's nuclear program? Does China want more sanctions? Does it want more engagement? Where does it stand?
I think from the Chinese perspective, economic sanctions don't really work. We have imposed very comprehensive and strict economic sanctions over North Korea for the past few years. And they haven't really played an important role in restraining North Korean behavior. So China believes we really have to engage with North Korea. And recently, in fact, yesterday, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, made the same statement. And he said, it is unlikely that we will be able to persuade North Korea to denuclearize through coercive means, and therefore we have to, talk to North Korea and focus on more practical and more pragmatic objectives, which is to cap and to freeze North Korea's nuclear capabilities.
I want to get to James Clapper's statement in a moment, but Eunjung, South Korea is preparing its defenses, despite what the Chinese are saying right now. They're even considering a preemptive strike against the DPRK. How deep is the concern in South Korea that it could be the target of a nuclear attack?
Yes, absolutely. Our concern is very, very serious, and it's increasingly getting serious because we practice dovish engagement policy during especially Kim Dae-jung and the Roh Moo-hyun administration. We practice that kind of engagement policy, and we experienced almost like a 5-6 year during the Obama administration strategic patient strategy too. But neither of all these precedented practices actually didn't work, as probably the other panelists pointed out. So my point is, these days, more and more Korean people really got the concerns about whatever we have already done, or what we are. So creating, it's the frustration, the level of frustration. So more and more people speak that I need to think about any possible or preventive strike too. Because we have been against the patient, and we have been more like gentle to the rest of the international community as well. But what returned to us was like that. So I think again, this is a deep reflection of the deep anxiety and the frustrations about the existing or the precedented practices.
Right, and Brian, another example of that concern is the fact that there are other things happening. As we mentioned, there's been a meeting between former U.S. diplomats. They held talks with DPRK officials in Malaysia. One U.S. official was quoted as saying that they had been, quote unquote, progress. How much importance can we attach to those talks?
There needs to be a fundamental realignment of U.S. foreign policy towards the DPRK. 16 years ago, almost 16 years ago to this month, Madeleine Albright, then Secretary of State, was in Pyongyang. She met with Kim Jong Il. It was a historic meeting. It took place in the context of a thaw going on between North and South Korea. There was the historic June 13th summit where Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong Il laid a roadmap really for the possible relaxation of tensions, After that, President Bush came into office before there could be a normalization of relations between the U.S. and DPRK, and immediately scuttled any sort of rapprochement. As a consequence, when he labeled DPRK part of the axis of evil along with Iran and Iraq, DPRK said, we're leaving the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, we're going to get nuclear weapons, we're going to defend our country, and now relations have frozen for the last 16 years. Those relations need to change. The Korean War ended in 1953, but it didn't really end, only an armistice. What DPRK wants from the United States is normalization of relations, a peace treaty, and real opportunity to exchange, to engage as a normal part of the international community. That, not economic sanctions, is the road to peace in the Korean Peninsula.
Zhao Tong, clearly the approach up to now has not worked, as Brian points out. The previous policy of engagement had some results, but if China is looking now at engagement, is looking at negotiation to resolve this issue, what kind of leverage can China use on the DPRK?
Certainly, China can help strengthen existing sanctions, signaling to North Korea that China does not agree with its approach of achieving national security objectives. However, I think the key player here is still the United States. The key source of North Korean insecurity is from the United States and South Korea. And the U.S. government, North Korean government has repeatedly demanded direct talks with the United States to improve relations, to help, to make United States help mitigate the security environment for North Korea. So U.S. has to take a more flexible approach towards North Korea. Most recently, North Korea has repeatedly demanded negotiation with U.S. on a near-term step towards the ultimate goal of denuclearization. And this near-term step is for North Korea to stop nuclear testing. And in exchange for that, U.S. and South Korea should suspend their joint military exercises as well. I think that's the type of near-term compromises that we need to see from the United States. That will open the door for substantive discussions and progress on denuclearization of North Korea.
All right, you say the United States has to take a more flexible approach, but Eunjung, one can argue that the United States is already taking a more flexible approach. I mean, we're hearing the kind of sentiments expressed by top U.S. officials that says, look, okay, what's been happening in the past has not worked, we have to look at something new. We talked about James Clapper's statement earlier on. Let's take a look at that statement. Let's watch.
I think the notion of getting the North Koreans to denuclearize is probably a lost cause. They are not going to do that. That is their ticket to survival. And I got a good taste of that when I was there, about how the world looks from their vantage. And they are under siege and they are very paranoid. So the notion of giving up their nuclear capability, whatever it is a non-starter with them.
So I guess the point James Clapper is making there, that the world now has to live with a nuclear-armed DPRK. Do you agree?
Of course, I don't agree. We cannot accept, the nuclear-armed, the other Korea. Of course, the methodology, about the methodology, our opinions can be diverse, but still, it's not acceptable from the South Koreans' point of view. And at the same time, we have worked together. This RA-U.S. alliance has maintained or has practiced all these counter possible measures against those provocations from North. So if, for example, the United States directly just normalized the relations with the DPRK without any consultation with us, the Republic of Korea, it's totally not acceptable. If so, what is the meaning of the last, the 60 years long the alliance? So my point is, I don't actually completely disagree with what Zhao Tong said. At some point, probably we need to resume the dialogues or negotiations with North Korea. But the thing is the timing. And another thing I'm really concerned about is how strong the Kim Jong Un's, the political will to come to the table. So those two, key variables are still, we don't know about exactly about those two variables are clear enough to resume the negotiations.
I'll get to you in a moment, Zhao Tong. I just want to go to Brian. Brian, we heard James Clapper there say that the DPRK needs nuclear weapons for its survival. Would it be suicide for the DPRK to give up its weapons? One just has to look at, given the threats that have been coming from the United States, one has to look at what happened in Libya to that country and its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, when they were persuaded to give up their nuclear weapons.
What happened in Libya? What happened in Iraq? In both cases, the regime disarmed, the regime was targeted, the regime was essentially defenseless, and the United States bombed the country. In the case of Iraq, invaded and occupied the country, and the regime was toppled. So, of course, the DPRK knows fully well that if they were to give up their weapons, the ultimate weapon, in this case nuclear weapons, that it would make them more, not less vulnerable. The thing that they fear, the existential threat they fear, is from the United States. The United States, during the Korean War, of course, along with other nations from the United Nations, was bombing North Korea. There wasn't one structure taller than one story left standing by 1952, a year before the war ended. It's real. It's a real feeling on the part of the DPRK. Every war has a beginning and an end. The World War II, the United States and Germany and Japan were at war. At a certain point, the war came to an end, and then there were new alignments, new allies. Why can't the war in Korea come to an end? That's really what the DPRK is saying. In terms of the initial steps, confidence-building steps, a year ago, January, and a year before that, the North Koreans offered to suspend nuclear weapons tests, future nuclear weapons tests, in exchange for the cancellation of the military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the U.S. The United States administration said absolutely not, immediately. Why say absolutely not? Why not start talking? It's the obligation of the United States to change the equation on the Korean Peninsula. The other parts of the six-party talks are good, but those countries don't, from the point of view of DPRK, pose an existential threat to the existence of the government.
Right, Zhao Tong, you wanted to say?
We are talking about North Korea's nuclear programs, and we also mentioned historically there were multiple cases in which U.S. and North Korea managed to achieve agreements during which the U.S. promised to the United States, to North Korea, that U.S. meant no hostility towards Pyongyang and would not use nuclear weapons and conventional weapons to invade Pyongyang. In return, North Korea promised to denuclearize. However, almost all those previous agreements failed. And I think one important reason why they failed was North Korea gradually realized the American side of the bargain are basically political commitment, and that could be walked back or reversed overnight. But North Korean, if it denuclearized, it will take many, many years to get back. I think that's why those previous agreements failed. So here, let me try to play the devil's advocate here. I think to some extent, now North Korea has achieved nuclear deterrent, which means it can use its own means to safeguard its national survival and security, which might serve as a basis for North Korea to be more self-confident, to be able finally to focus on economic development and to have a more cooperative, less rebelliant foreign policy. So that could be a start for cooperative diplomacy with North Korea. Do we really want to do everything to do away this newly gained sense of security by North Korea and then go back to the old game of North Korea feeling really insecure and doing everything to increase its military capabilities?
Right.
Another point is, we certainly can engage with North Korea without accepting and recognizing or acknowledging its nuclear status. North Korea certainly wants us to recognize status as nuclear weapon state, but we don't need to do that, but still we can engage with them. Let's remember that the value of nuclear weapons is socially constructed. If we, the international community, focuses exclusively on North Korea's nuclear weapons, we will only convince them that nuclear weapon is very important and make them less willing to give up. And we have to remember that by focusing completely on nuclear weapons, we are forgetting the much bigger picture of the overall relationship with North Korea. There are many other aspects of the relationship with North Korea that have nothing to do with nuclear. And if we engage with them in these other areas, we can also help shape their threat perception and shape their security choices. Why don't we do that?